My name is Scarlett, and I'm 31 years old. I work as a home health aide. I help elderly patients with their daily routines, medication schedules, the kinds of things their own families are too busy to do. I've been doing it for 6 years. It doesn't pay a fortune, but I'm good at it, and more importantly, I actually care about the people I work with. My family doesn't see it that way. My younger brother is the golden child. His name is Dominic, and he's 27, and from the moment he was born, the entire gravitational pull of our family shifted in his direction. I was 4 years old when he arrived, and I still remember my mother's face changing. Not in a dramatic movie scene kind of way, just quietly, the way a light slowly dims without you noticing until suddenly the room feels darker and you can't figure out when exactly it happened. Dominic was charming and loud and easy to love in the way that loud people often are. I was quieter, more careful. I read books. I made my own lunch on school mornings because my mother was busy getting Dominic ready. Small things, I told myself. Normal things. But they accumulate. When I was 16, I won the Regional Writing Award. My mother said, "That's nice, honey," and then spent 45 minutes on the phone with my grandmother talking about Dominic's baseball tryouts. He didn't even make the team. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because I remember sitting on the stairs listening to her voice, that animated, proud voice she used when she talked about him, and thinking, I wonder what it would feel like to be spoken about like that. I grew up. I moved out at 22, earlier than I planned, because the house had become a place where I felt like a house guest who'd overstayed her welcome. I got my certification, started my job, found an apartment I loved, started building something that actually felt like mine. I met my boyfriend, Nathan, through a mutual friend when I was 26. He was steady and patient and thought it was genuinely impressive that I did what I did for work. He'd sometimes come with me on the weekends when I checked in on one of my older patients who had no family nearby, and he'd just sit and talk with her like it was the most natural thing in the world. I fell in love with him quietly, the way I do most things. My family had met Nathan a handful of times. My mother was polite but distracted. My father shook his hand and then immediately turned the conversation back to Dominic's new sales job. Dominic himself barely acknowledged Nathan existed. I should have paid more attention to all of that. I keep thinking that now. About 2 years into Nathan and me being together, Dominic got engaged to a woman named Felicity. I'd met her a few times. She was the type of person who laughed at everything and agreed with whoever was talking, and she and my mother got along immediately, which told me everything I needed to know. The engagement announcement happened at a family dinner, and everyone cried and hugged, and my mother immediately started talking venues and dates, and I smiled and said congratulations and meant it, genuinely, because whatever my feelings about my family dynamics, I didn't wish Dominic anything but happiness. I tried to be involved. I texted Felicity and said if she ever needed help with anything, errands, research, whatever, I was available. She sent back a thumbs up emoji. 3 weeks later, she called me, which surprised me enough that I actually checked the name twice before answering. She said she had a favor to ask. She'd found this incredible vintage dress at an estate sale. It needed work, alterations, some delicate repairs, and she knew I was handy with a sewing machine. My grandmother had taught me when I was a kid, one of the few things from that house I actually loved. She said the dress was irreplaceable and she trusted me with it more than a stranger. I felt something move in my chest when she said that. Something that wanted to be warmth. I said yes, of course. I put real time into that dress, evenings after long shifts, a full weekend, tiny careful stitches. I was proud of what I did with it. Then, the week before the wedding, I still hadn't received any details. No address for the venue, no time, no mention of a seat at a table, nothing. I assumed it was an oversight. I texted Felicity asking what time I should arrive on Saturday. She didn't respond for 2 days. When she finally did, the message was 4 words long. "You're not coming, Scarlett." I stared at my phone for a long time. Then I called her, because I needed to believe I'd misread it. She picked up, which I wasn't expecting. Her voice was not unkind, which somehow made it worse. She explained very calmly that Dominic's side of the guest list had gotten complicated and they'd had to make some cuts, and this is the part I will never forget as long as I live. She said she didn't want her new in-laws, some of whom were, in her words, old money, very traditional. To know that Dominic's sister worked as a home health aide, she was worried about how it would look. She said she hoped I understood. I did not understand. I asked her if she was serious. She said she was. She said Dominic knew and agreed it was for the best and that they both appreciated how much work I'd put into the dress and that they'd send me a piece of cake. I hung up. I called my mother. I don't know what I needed. Confirmation that this was insane. A voice that would say, of course they're wrong. Of course you're invited. My mother's response was to sigh and say, well, Scarlett, I'm sure they have their reasons. Wedding planning is very stressful. My father, when I tried to explain it to him later that evening, said I was being sensitive and that Dominic had a lot riding on making a good impression with Felicity's family. It's just one day, he said. You'll get over it. I sat with that for a while. Just one day. As if being deliberately erased from my own brother's wedding because of my job was something you just absorb and move on from. Like a minor inconvenience, I called Nathan from my car, parked outside my parents' house because I hadn't been able to drive yet. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause, and then he said very quietly, Scarlett, I need to tell you something. I'd been helping Dominic with some of the logistics for the wedding. He reached out a few months ago, and I didn't know how to tell you. I thought it would be awkward, and I honestly thought you'd be there too, so I figured it wouldn't matter. I closed my eyes. He said it quickly. He was doing the photography for the rehearsal dinner, coordinating some things. He hadn't been paid. He'd done it as a favor because Dominic was going to be his brother-in-law and he was trying to build a relationship. He hadn't told me because the whole topic of my family made me tense, and he'd been trying to protect me from it. I understood his reasoning. I did. But sitting in that car, I felt very alone in a way that was hard to put into words. Nathan said, "Tell me what you need." And after a long silence, I said, I need you to pull out. Tell them you can't do it. He said, okay. No argument. Just okay. I went home. I spent a few hours thinking about the dress, which was finished and hanging in a garment bag in my closet. I'd put a combined 12 or 13 hours into it. The beading alone had taken an entire weekend. I called Felicity the next morning and told her I'd be returning the dress. She asked what I meant. I told her I meant I would be bringing back the dress and she should find someone else to do the remaining work, which was minimal, or wear it as is. She asked if I was serious. I told her I was. She told her I was. She told me that was incredibly petty and that I was ruining her wedding. I said I hoped she had a lovely day and ended the call. Nathan dropped the dress at Dominic's apartment with a short note. The wedding was that Saturday. I went to a farmer's market with my neighbor and ate a breakfast burrito in the sun and watched someone's dog chase a butterfly, and it was one of the better mornings I'd had in a while. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up. The man on the other end introduced himself as Hugh, Felicity's father. He said he was calling because he'd been sitting with something since the wedding and needed to understand it. He said he'd asked Dominic at the reception where his sister was, since he'd heard mention of a sister, and Dominic had said I was traveling for work. Hugh had found that odd. He said he had a daughter of his own, and the idea of her being absent from a family wedding without a more substantial explanation bothered him. He'd done some asking around and eventually gotten to the truth. He was not pleased. He told me he had nothing against home health aides. His own mother had been cared for by one in her final years. He said the whole thing reflected very poorly on Dominic and Felicity both, and that it had changed how he thought about his new son-in-law. I didn't say much. I just answered his questions honestly. I don't know exactly what happened in the conversations that followed between Hugh and Felicity and Dominic, but within a week I started getting calls from Dominic, at first controlled and then increasingly not. He told me I had no right to talk to Felicity's father. I told him I'd answered a phone call. He told me I'd gone behind his back. I asked him what he thought excluding me from his wedding was. He hung up. My mother called me the following day. She was upset. Genuinely upset, the kind I hadn't heard from her in a long time. But not on my behalf. She was upset because Hugh had reportedly been cold to Dominic at a family brunch, and Felicity had cried, and Dominic was furious at me. She said, "You really couldn't just let this go? You had to make it everyone's problem?" There was a time when that would have gutted me, when I would have apologized or defended myself until I was exhausted or spent days trying to untangle whether I'd done something wrong. Instead, I said, "Mom, I answered a phone call from a man who was asking honest questions. I told him the truth. If that's a problem, the problem isn't mine." And then I said something I'd been sitting on for about 25 years. I've spent my whole life trying to make myself smaller so Dominic could have more room. I'm not doing it anymore. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said I'd always been dramatic. I said, okay, and hung up. That might have been the end of it, except it wasn't because Dominic was not done. He started posting things. Vague things at first. Social media captions about family betrayal and people who smile to your face, but they escalated. Then he wrote something that wasn't vague at all. A long post about how his sister had deliberately sabotaged his wedding by spreading lies to his wife's family and how she'd returned her work on the dress out of spite and nearly caused a disaster. And how some people just cannot stand to see others happy. Mutual friends messaged me. My cousin called. People who'd never had opinions about my family suddenly had opinions about my family. I screenshotted everything. 2 weeks after the post started, Dominic showed up at my workplace. Not to talk to me. I wasn't in a client's home at that point. I was at the small administrative office our agency uses twice a week for paperwork. He walked in and started raising his voice in front of my coworkers and my supervisor. He said I'd destroyed his marriage, that Hugh had been awful to him because of me, that Felicity was depressed, that I owed him an apology in front of his wife and her entire family. My supervisor, a woman named Patricia who I have known for 5 years and who does not tolerate nonsense, asked him to leave. He didn't immediately. He kept talking. She called building security? I was shaking by the time he left. Not from fear, exactly. More from the strange grief of watching someone who shares your blood become a person you don't recognize. Nathan drove me home that night. He didn't say much. He just made dinner while I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, the way I used to sit as a kid when things felt too large. He put a bowl of pasta next to me and sat on the floor too. I didn't cry, I just felt tired. I talked to a lawyer that week, a friend of Nathan's family, who looked at my screenshots and documentation and said clearly and without hesitation that I had grounds to pursue a harassment case. We drafted a cease and desist. Dominic ignored it, so we filed. The process took several months, which was its own particular kind of exhausting. But the documentation was thorough. The posts, the workplace incident, the calls, a letter he'd sent to my apartment that my lawyer described as aggressively ill-advised. The outcome was a formal injunction requiring him to remove the posts and maintain distance from my home and workplace. Violating it would carry real consequences. He removed the posts. During all of this, something else happened quietly. My parents, who had been loudly on Dominic's side throughout, calling me stubborn, calling me vindictive, telling mutual relatives I'd overreacted to a small slight, went silent. Not apologetic, not reflective, just silent, the way people go silent when they realize the story they've been telling doesn't hold together under scrutiny. My mother called once about a month after the injunction. She said she hoped we could move past all of this and have a normal family again. I asked her what she meant by normal. She said she meant the way things used to be. I told her, gently, that the way things used to be was not something I was interested in returning to. She said that was hurtful. I said I understood. I said I understood. I said I needed time, and I didn't know how much. She didn't call again for a long while. Dominic, to my knowledge, has not tried to contact me since the injunction. Felicity's father sent me a card, an actual card, handwritten, around the holidays. He said he was sorry for the part he'd played in a difficult situation and wished me well. I put the card on my refrigerator. It's still there. Nathan and I moved to a different neighborhood about 4 months ago. Not because of Dominic. We'd been thinking about it for a while, wanted more space, liked the area. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some relief in the new address. I still work with my elderly patients. I still do my rounds. Last Tuesday, one of them, a woman in her 80s who grew up in rural Georgia and has stories that would knock you down, told me I was the best part of her week. She said it the way she says everything, straight and simple, without performance. I drove home with the windows down and the radio on and felt something that was probably happiness, or at least its close neighbor. I'm not carrying anger about my family anymore. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. What happened hurt me, deeply and in ways I'm still working through. But the anger burned out on its own, somewhere around the time I stopped needing to explain myself to people who'd already decided who I was. I have Nathan. I have work that means something. I have a kitchen where I cook real meals and a bedroom where I sleep without dreading what the next phone call will bring. Some nights I still think about that dress. All those careful stitches, the hours bent over the fabric under a good lamp. I think about the person I was when I agreed to do it, how much I still wanted them to see me. I don't regret pulling it back. I only wish I'd stopped trying to earn something that was never going to be offered. I know that now. It took a while, but I know it. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in this story, not the timeline of events, but the mechanics underneath them. The cause and effect that most people miss when they're too close to the hurt. Dominic and Felicity made a calculation. They decided that what I did for a living made me a liability, something to be hidden from people whose opinions they valued more than my presence. That calculation felt like power to them in the moment. It wasn't. It was a debt they were quietly accumulating, and the bill came due in ways they never anticipated. Not because I engineered it, but because you cannot build something real on a foundation of that kind of dishonesty and expect it to hold. Hugh didn't call me because I asked him to. He called me because something didn't add up, and he was the kind of man who needed things to add up. That's the part nobody plans for when they decide to exclude someone. The people watching from the outside who notice the gap and go looking for an explanation. I keep coming back to the dress. 13 hours. I know that sounds like I'm dwelling on it, but I'm not, or not in the way it might seem. What I'm actually thinking about when I think about the dress is the version of me who agreed to make it. She wanted so badly to be included, to be useful enough, to earn a seat at the table by demonstrating her value in a way they couldn't dismiss. That is a painful way to move through the world, and I did it for a long time. The dress was just the last time. There's something clarifying about reaching a genuine limit. Not a dramatic one, not a performative one, just the quiet moment when you realize you are done. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I simply called and said I was bringing the dress back, and I did. And that was the end of something that needed to end. The intelligence in that moment wasn't cleverness. It wasn't strategy. It was just finally being honest with myself about what I was and wasn't willing to absorb in order to be loved by people who had demonstrated repeatedly that their love came with conditions I couldn't meet. That kind of honesty takes time to develop. You have to live through enough of the alternative first. What I want to say to anyone who recognizes something in this story is not fight back or stand your ground or any of those phrases that sound strong but mostly just mean perform strength for other people. What I want to say is, pay attention to what you're tolerating in the name of connection, and ask yourself honestly whether what you're getting back is worth it. Not in a cold, transactional way, but truthfully in the quiet of your own mind without the noise of what you wish were true. I have a job that matters. I have Nathan, who sat on the kitchen floor with me and didn't try to fix anything, just stayed. I have patients who call me the best part of their week and mean it simply. I have a new neighborhood and a kitchen that smells like whatever I decided to cook, and mornings where nothing is required of me except to be exactly who I am. That's not nothing. That's actually everything.